What if I told you that everything you've been taught about money is a lie? That the harder you work, the poorer you actually become? That every single dollar you save is secretly losing value while you sleep? You think you're in control of your finances, right? You work, you earn, you pay taxes, you do everything right. But what if the entire system was built to make sure you never truly escape? Because here's the truth. While you're budgeting and cutting expenses, someone else is printing money out of thin air. While you're saving for the future, someone else is inflating the currency you're saving in. And while you're trying to build your dream life, someone, somewhere, is quietly profiting from your struggle. In this video, you'll finally see the hidden financial tricks governments have used for centuries to keep ordinary people, like you, trapped, dependent, and broke. You'll understand how inflation, debt, and economic growth are just different names for the same ancient scam. And most importantly, you'll learn how to protect yourself, your future, and your freedom before it's too late. So if you've ever looked at your paycheck and wondered, why does it feel like I'm running faster, but going nowhere? Don't scroll, don't click away, because by the end of this video, you'll see the system for what it really is. And once you do, you'll never see money the same way again. Let's begin. The hidden financial tricks governments use to consolidate power. Governments often claim they are working towards your financial independence. They emphasize security, growth, and opportunities. However, a closer examination of history reveals a much more troubling reality. Governments have consistently employed covert financial tactics to keep the average person struggling while amassing wealth and authority for themselves. Most surprisingly, these tactics are not a recent phenomenon. They have been reused over the centuries, presented in various forms, marketed under different titles, but always aimed at transferring wealth to the rich and maintaining dependence among the majority. Historical blueprint, ancient and medieval tricks. The oldest trick: inflation and currency debasement. Let's begin with the most ancient and straightforward trick known: inflation. When a government spends more than it can collect through taxes, it has two choices. It can openly acknowledge the situation and increase taxes on its citizens, which can be politically risky. Alternatively, it can covertly devalue the currency, diminishing the worth of every coin and note in circulation. Ancient Rome excelled in this method. During the 3rd century after Christ, emperors, confronted with military costs, started lowering the silver content of the denarius. A coin that once nearly contained pure silver eventually became predominantly copper with just a thin layer of silver. The empire acted as if nothing had changed, but everyone in possession of those coins bore the consequences. Inflation surged, savings dwindled, and wages lagged behind. It effectively functioned as a hidden tax on the populace, an approach still utilized today, now with central banks in place of imperial mints. Medieval coercion, forced loans. The Middle Ages introduced a different form of this practice: compulsory loans. Rulers in England, France, and Spain frequently pressured affluent merchants and guilds to lend funds to the monarchy. Naturally, these loans were not voluntary. Refusing meant penalties, seizure of assets, or worse consequences. Occasionally, the crown would assure repayment with interest, but repayments often came late, in devalued currency, or not at all. The government financed its wars and royal residences, while merchants had little option but to part with their capital. The strategy involved coercion presented as nationalism or obligation, and it proved effective for centuries. The birth of national finance as a wealth transfer system. By the 17th century, the financial system itself evolved into a clever strategy. The establishment of the Bank of England in 1694 was not a charitable act, but rather a necessity for the government to raise funds for its wars against France. Wealthy investors purchased government bonds, and in exchange, the crown committed to paying interest funded through taxes. While this might seem like a reasonable arrangement, consider who actually bore those tax burdens: everyday people, through taxes on goods such as salt, beer, and cloth. The affluent lent money to the government and earned secure interest, while the less fortunate paid increased taxes to cover those interest payments. It was a system of wealth redistribution disguised as national finance. This created a pattern that persists today. The most secure investments globally involve lending money to governments, with those returns ultimately backed by the labor and consumption of the general population. Modern financial sleight of hand. Deficit spending. Debt as a burden on the public. In today's world, deceptive practices are widespread. Consider deficit spending. Governments accumulate enormous debts by issuing bonds that are purchased by investors, banks, and foreign entities. Politicians claim it's intended for infrastructure, job creation, or social initiatives. However, a large portion ends up benefiting defense contractors, corporate bailouts, and subsidies. When it's time to repay, governments don't reduce high-level spending. Instead, they increase taxes, devalue the currency, or cut social programs. The illusion is that the debt appears to be for the public good, but the real burden falls on them, while the gains flow to bondholders. Bailouts. Privatizing gains, socializing losses. Then there are bailouts. In the midst of the 2008 financial crisis, banks made reckless investments, packaged toxic mortgages into securities, and came close to causing a global economic collapse. Who footed the bill? Everyday taxpayers via enormous government bailouts. Who reaped the rewards afterward? The same banks, which came out larger and more consolidated than they were before. The strategy was straightforward: profit from the gains while offloading the losses onto the public. And the public was informed that this was essential to preserve the system. The pension Ponzi scheme. Even the manner in which governments manage pensions and retirement is a form of deception. For many years, individuals in nations like the United States, the United Kingdom, and throughout Europe have contributed to government-run systems, believing that their funds would be available upon retirement. However, governments frequently don't actually save these funds. They spend them right away and leave behind IOUs. The assurance is that future taxpayers will shoulder the expenses when repayment is required. It is fundamentally a multi-generational Ponzi scheme, disguised in formal terminology. It functions until changing demographics and an aging population make the system unworkable. At that point, the government typically reforms the system, often by cutting benefits, increasing the retirement age, or diminishing the value of payouts through inflation. Sophisticated modern mechanisms. The language of deception. Observe the trend. At each point, the deception hinges on perception. The public is led to believe that inflation equates to growth. Coerced loans are termed duty. National debt is referred to as investment. Bailouts are labeled stability, and pension reductions are called reform. The terminology obscures the truth. It represents a shift of wealth from the many to the few, from the lower classes to the upper echelons. Historical evidence indicates this deception has been effective for centuries, as most individuals do not examine economic history, fail to grasp financial systems, and do not recognize the snare until it is too late. Quantitative easing, saving the system for the top. In recent years, the techniques have only grown more advanced. Look at quantitative easing, a concept that many people had never encountered until the 2008 financial crisis. Central banks generated trillions of dollars from nothing, purchasing government bonds and mortgage-backed securities to stabilize the markets. Politicians and bankers assured the public that this was essential to avert collapse, and it succeeded for the financial system. Asset prices skyrocketed. Stocks, real estate, and bonds increased significantly in value. But who holds most of those assets? The wealthy. For the typical household without substantial investments, the advantages were minimal, while the drawbacks included distorted markets and escalating living expenses. The strategy here was that money creation rescued the system for those at the top, while exacerbating inflation and inequality for everyone else. Stealth taxation. Another contemporary trick is covert taxation. Rather than directly increasing income taxes, governments subtly impose taxes through means such as sales taxes, fuel charges, and primarily inflation. When costs escalate more rapidly than wages, the disparity acts as a concealed tax on savings and purchasing power. Governments favor inflation as it diminishes the real value of their liabilities, but for the public, it undermines financial independence. You might perceive yourself as wealthier because your pay appears higher in nominal terms, but if your expenses rise faster than your income, you are ultimately losing wealth. This isn't a flaw in the system, it is the system. Inflation is not merely an incidental economic occurrence, it is one of the most reliable strategies employed employed by governments to transfer the expense of their spending onto you without ever acknowledging it. Regulatory capture. Regulatory capture is another issue to consider. While regulations are ostensibly designed to safeguard the public, like financial regulations, safety measures, and consumer rights, history repeatedly illustrates that influential industries can sway the very regulators tasked with monitoring them. In the 19th century, railroads; in the 20th century, oil companies; and today, tech and finance sectors have all influenced policies to benefit themselves. This mirrors the lesson learned by the Peaky Blinders in Birmingham. It's better to control the referee than to compete fair and square. Governments utilize regulation as a means to give the impression of protection, but behind the scenes, the biggest corporations exploit loopholes that suppress competition and enhance profits. While the public perceives protection, those in the know recognize it as profit. War finance. Financial burdens for generations. Financing wars is an age-old tactic dressed in modern attire. In both World War I and World War II, governments raised significant funds by selling bonds, asserting that purchasing them was a patriotic obligation. Citizens believed they were aiding their country, which they indeed were. However, these bonds also became profitable, low-risk investments for the affluent, secured by future tax revenues. In this century, the same trend continues. The trillions spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were funded through debt, benefiting defense contractors, banks, and bondholders, while ordinary taxpayers faced the cost. The deception lies in the portrayal of wars as temporary crises. Nevertheless, the financial consequences endure for generations, well after the soldiers have returned home. Weaponized complexity. Governments also manipulate complexity as a financial tactic. Tax codes that span thousands of pages, financial products so intricate that even experts have difficulty explaining them, and budgets filled with concealed details and technical language. All of this creates a situation where average citizens cannot possibly track the flow of money. Complexity acts as a disguise. When you cannot observe the movement of wealth, you cannot oppose it. In ancient Rome, degraded coins served as a tangible indication of the deception. Today, it's balance sheets obscured by acronyms and ambiguous programs. The deception remains the same. Make it too complicated for the public to understand, and the transfer can occur without notice. The accelerating trap and the power of knowledge. Conclusion. Why is this significant now? Because the deceptions are active and increasing. Inflation diminishes your savings. Debt burdens expand each year. Bailouts are the go-to solution whenever markets falter. Central banks keep manipulating the money supply, while governments transfer costs onto the public in ways so indirect that most people fail to make the connection. The outcome is a system designed to make you labor harder for less genuine wealth, while the financial elite become wealthier. The historical lesson is not just that these deceptions exist, but that they always resurface. When Rome devalued its coins, its citizens suffered. When monarchs compelled loans, merchants lost their fortunes. When contemporary states inflate and accumulate debt, households suffer the consequences. Different eras, same tactics. And here's the brutal reality. Most individuals will never break free from these deceptions because they don't even realize they are being played. They accept inflation as a given, taxes as unavoidable, and bailouts as acts of kindness. They trust government narratives instead of studying economic history. That ignorance is the most potent trick of all. When people overlook the past, they cannot identify its recurrence. This is why governments and elites favor a public that lacks financial literacy. Knowledge in finance is a form of resistance. Understanding economic history is a powerful tool. If you are aware of these tricks, you become more difficult to manipulate. So, what should you take from this? First, always look deeper than the headlines. When governments announce stimulus plans, question who benefits first. When inflation rises, remember that it's not merely bad luck, it's a result of policy. When regulations are introduced, inquire about who drafted them and who stands to gain. Second, create genuine wealth outside of the traps, assets that can retain value even when currency cannot. Third, never assume that the system is designed to benefit you just because it claims to do so. Systems exist primarily to safeguard themselves, not to protect you. History may not repeat itself, but if you don't comprehend it, it will still overpower you. The financial deceptions that impoverished Roman citizens are the same ones draining your bank account today, albeit expressed in contemporary terms. The only distinction is whether you recognize them in time. If this provided you with a fresh perspective, consider subscribing. History holds the solutions. You just need to know where to look.